Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist and historical linguist Dr. Jackson Crawford. On my channel, I often talk about the history of Old Norse, English, and other languages, and I've done a series of shorts that have been, I guess, fairly well received, if shorts get received, about word origins. And in those, I often trace some kind of surprising connections between words. For example, you might not expect that hawk and have come from the same Indo-European root, and so does Latin capere, which gives us, for example, English capture. Now, sometimes people react to this kind of thing with incredulity. How can you say that? It just seems very arbitrary to people. But I want to give you a couple thoughts about how this really isn't arbitrary and about how there really is a science to this that can surprise us and yet be rigorously applied and truly scientific in spirit. So really the way that language changes is regular, and the best way to think about this analogically is to consider what you do when you make fun of someone else's accent, imitate someone else's accent. You're going to do regular things. You're going to imitate particular things that person does that are systematically different from how you speak. If you're imitating a Southern accent, you're likely to do the monophthongization that Southern speakers have. For example, and this actually varies between Southern speakers exactly how it gets monophthongized, whether it gets monophthongized all the time, before all consonants or whatever. But for example, you might say ride rather than ride, right? But you're going to do that systematically. You're going to say ride instead of ride. You're going to say, bride instead of bride, right? In whatever the conditioning environment is, whatever the sound is that's different from your own language or accent, you're going to consistently change it. And those little differences those consistent little differences between accents today, overall, over time, accumulate so that you get 10 or 12 of those and you might have a really different dialect. You get 20 or 30 of those and you might be able to talk about a really different language, like German and English. German Tag and English day both come from the same word, dagas, in Proto-Germanic. Both of them have dropped that as, that grammatical nominative singular ending. And English has changed that G into originally kind of a glide, a y, day in Old English, and finally just as part of the diphthong and the vowel root. German, on the other hand, has taken that D, turned it into a T. This is a routine thing in German, the High German sound shift, and has undergone final divoicing, so the old G is a K when it's at the end of a word. That's how you get Tag. So it's actually not that many changes that separate this cognate word into languages that are still fairly close to one another, still share an ancestor language 1,500 to 2,000 years ago, which isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. One of the greatest examples of the regularity of sound change is Grimm's law, which determines how the consonants in Germanic languages, like English, German, and the Scandinavian languages, develop from the common ancestor of most languages of Europe and northern India, Proto-Indo-European. Let me give you a quick word from my friends and partners at Grimm Frost, and I'll tell you a little bit about Grimm's law in particular. Operation of Grimm's law. P's routinely become F's in the Germanic language, just as T routinely becomes F, and K routinely becomes H. So, for example, if we look at a language where the P, T, K hasn't changed, Latin, we can see pater, cognate with English, father, tenuis, first part cognate with English, then, cord, cognate with English, heart. Now, we also borrow words from Latin like paternal, tenuous, cordial, that use those Latin reflexes of those sound changes, right? The unchanged Indo-European consonants. That doesn't discount the fact that in our inherited vocabulary, and in fact the words that we're much more likely to use, our own basic vocabulary does have those Grimm's Law changes. But English does have so many borrowed words that it can be a little bit obscured because we do have words that come from other languages that went through those languages' particular sound changes. We also see B become P, D become T, G become K. So in baculum, the first part of that is cognate with English peg. Gel, cognate with English cool. Dense, cognate with English teeth. We also get a bonus D to T and heart, my example from the C to H change. And then Indo-European had a series of consonants that were voiced or breathy voiced, but aspirated. These are best preserved in Sanskrit. So the old BH becomes a B in Germanic languages like English. The old DH becomes a D in Germanic languages like English. So Sanskrit preserves these as English brother, and matu, honey, is English mead. If we look at Greek cane with a KH that comes from the old Indo-European GH, which is not preserved exactly in Sanskrit, we can see the cognate of English goose. But these are in fact completely regular changes that run through the whole language, right? Cord, heart. Canis, cognate with English hound. Cap is cognate with English have. Now, once we've established those regularities, we can see some really surprising things, like the fact that English have is not cognate with Latin habere, because we expect this regular change of a C, K sound to H in the Germanic languages. Again, not in words we borrow from Latin, but in words that we inherit from the same common source. Another one of these good examples, C and H, is Latin, the word borrowed from Latin, conceal. That seal comes from a Latin cellere, hide. That's cognate with English hell, right, which is the hidden place, the place under the earth. Hole comes from the same root. So when we see English have in Latin habere, that has to be either borrowed from Latin, which it isn't. The word is very old. We see it in the oldest English texts from well before any contact or significant interaction with Latin. There was contact, there was interaction, but there wasn't enough interaction to borrow a really common verb. And in fact, it's just a coincidence these verbs end up looking really similar. It is, again, Latin capere, capture, that is cognate with English have. And as I pointed out in my short, doing this thing that people probably think is paid promotion but isn't, think about a hawk, like in this cool Microtech logo, right? The sweet Hera 2 from Trigger Time Knives, my good buddies who I try to help out by plugging. They've got those capturing talons, right? So it's a coincidence, sort of, that these words wind up looking the same and end up getting grammatically used the same, right? To make like a perfect tense, right? I have done. But that's exactly the kind of surprise that awaits us if we approach etymology with an open mind, look for these regular alternations, and establish what they are before deciding what words are really ultimately connected to one another over the course of thousands of years, even though borrowings have also happened in the course of those thousands of years. I hope that makes some reasonable sense and is halfway interesting as a look at how this game of etymologies, as people sometimes call it, they play games like Dictionarium or whatever on Jackbox TV, where etymologies are treated as this sort of like almost jokey thing. It's like, oh, of course this comes from some word that doesn't even look like this word today. I mean, sometimes it's true, but usually, at least responsible linguists, we really do have a story we can tell you about how that word that doesn't look very much like what comes out of it is its origin because we can pile up these regular changes that we can document along the way between one stage of a language and another and tell sometimes fascinating stories about how languages are connected to each other even across vast distances and times. So thanks to Patreon, thanks to Ko-Fi or Ko-fi, however the hell you say it, where folks can donate to support this continuing free series of videos about language, history, myth, runes, etc. Thanks to those buying my books out there, thanks to my Old Norse students on Zoom, and to everyone from high up in beautiful Colorado. Let me wish you